I say again, I would echo some thoughts from this morning. It's so good to see everybody back face to face in a room again and really having these kind of conversations. As someone just pointed out, the reason people are late back from coffee is because the chat is louder than the PA system. And that, in my mind, is always a good thing. So look, really continue that. It is brilliant to see so many of you gathered here and having such brilliant conversations. And thanks to the speakers this morning for having a really, really lively debate. But also thanks to you for giving me the challenge. And I've found my glasses because Slido seems to be getting smaller on my phone. I don't know what that is. I don't know, maybe it's an age thing, but it seems to be getting smaller. But it's great. Loads of really good questions coming through, and I'll keep dipping into those, and I'll bring those out as we move through. We've got another three more panel sessions today, but one's looking at moving people a bit later on in about half an hour's time. Another one's looking at moving goods, and then we're going to have a final wrap-up where you can really get stuck into all 7 STB leaders and put them on the spot. So loads of questions coming in. Do continue to do that. It is a brilliant way to get your questions out there. I haven't forgotten, though, that I did also say that I was going to come to the floor. So if you do, we've got 2 presentations, very quick presentations, and then we're going to do some Q&A. So if you do want to put some questions directly, then put your hand up. I'll look out for your hands going up, and I'll bring a microphone out to you. So let's push on now. I think everybody is wended their way back. To push on to the next part of the programme. We're going to hear now perspectives from National Roads and National Rail, and hear contributions from National Highways and Great British Railway Transition Team. I was just going to get that in my mind because we've got 2 organisations, both of which are just changing their names. What kind of chance does that give me? Anyway, National Highways and the Great British Railways Transition Team. So I'll introduce Elaine Seagriff in a moment from Great British Railway Transition Team. But first, let me introduce Nick Harris, Chief Executive of National Highways. Nick, you're going to talk us through the priorities and give us a quick update on where you see National Highways, but also, I suppose, how you think the STB family can really help you to deliver. So, Nick, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here in person, and wow, these lights are blinding, so I can't see you all, but I know you're all out there. My team have given me lots of material, so I'm going to try and talk about some of the kind of key priorities and leave some time for questions, so we have an interactive session, and I'll try and build on some of the things that were brought up in the panel discussion there. So I'll talk a bit about where we are, the importance of roads, what we're doing about carbon, but perhaps more importantly, how we're working with the 7 subnational transport bodies and the importance of that relationship. So roads really matter. Different modes of transport need to come together to help us to connect communities, industries, workplaces. But roads, and particularly the strategic road network, is a great network which anyone and everyone can access freely. It drives the economy, it connects communities, and it does provide a really convenient, low-cost and practical way of connecting businesses, enabling us to see families and friends. But of course, as we talked about earlier, we have to do this in a way that reduces our carbon impact, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So Highways England, now National Highways, I'm remembering the name, which is fantastic. Same as my initials, actually. That does help. Highways England was set up in 2015. I think since then we've established that we are good at building, operating and improving the network that we look after. We do that very safely, and we're gaining a really strong global reputation for running some of the safest roads in the world. And now we're in RIS 2, which is even more exciting. Huge amount of money that has been entrusted to us to further improve the network, maintain it, and run it safely. And I think it's important to note that At least half of that funding is about looking after the assets that we have. I think, as was mentioned earlier, we largely have the network that we need. It is about looking after those assets that we have and further improving them. So looking at things like junction improvements and dealing with pinch points becomes incredibly important. So that then leads me to look at the next road period, so RIS 3. We need to continue to support the economy, the government's objectives around levelling up, to support all of the growth and development aspirations that each of the regions have. But more than that, it really has to be the road period where we demonstrate that we can do this sustainably, that we can advance significantly on the journey towards carbon net zero or neutrality. I need to be careful about the meaning of each of those phrases. And so there are a number of very important changes, and I think the next road period is a really key pivot on many of those journeys. Working with the subnational transport bodies will play a more important role than ever in achieving all of that. So building on your regional transport strategies, the national transport strategies, providing advice to government on this, supporting key policy agendas around decarbonisation, electric vehicle infrastructure, better buses, freight, of course, and communities is incredibly important. And so we've already, of course, been working very closely with all of you, sharing expertise and data, studies, reports, looking for synergies where we can in our objectives. I'm working on lots of really interesting projects like Thinking in the North, Trans-Pennine connectivity, East-West or West-East connectivity, and freight. We're talking about the South-West and the long length of roads that we have supporting communities into the southwest of the country. So collaboration with all of you on the development of options and solutions has been and continues to be incredibly important. We've refreshed, hopefully, our approach to engaging with all of you. And my aim is that we continue to have a very open and constructive collaborative relationship, and we continue to build on that. We sit on the board of all of the STBs, which supports that. And the work that we've been doing has supported the work we've done on strategies, which is underpinning the plan that we're pulling together for the next road period. But I think looking at how we achieve better integration, how we can better support journeys between different transport modes and active travel remain really important challenges within all that. We are actually the biggest developer of cycle schemes in the country, which is maybe an interesting thing. But coming on to carbon and the environment, we have to do all of this in a sustainable way. We published last summer a very ambitious but important plan to reduce carbon, our route to net zero. So by 2030, our corporate carbon will get there. By 2040, operation and construction carbon, so that's most of the folk in the supply chain have a role to play in that. And by 2050, tailpipe carbon will be net zero. And I think it's really important, as we touched on earlier, to note that road transport will decarbonise very, very quickly. So yes, we need some modal shift, but I don't think we need to be looking to constrain demand growth. We will achieve our carbon objectives through some of that very rapid change. What are we doing? Well, we're changing our vehicle fleet, so we're buying electric and hybrid vehicles at the moment. We're changing all our lighting to LED. We're looking at the way we heat and light our offices. And of course, we're really getting stuck into new materials, so lower carbon concretes, how we can use less of it, how we can not build to achieve solutions on the network, and only building when we have to. And we've already on some schemes used, I think on the A14 we used low carbon cement, where we can reduce the carbon impact of that by 80%. We did a really interesting scheme in the northwest, again, where through a whole combination of recycling different materials and using electric vehicles, we massively reduced both the carbon impact of that scheme, but also the impact on the community by reducing movement of vehicles, etc. So there's more we have to do to make sure we achieve that. And just thinking about, the house is burning and we can't put this off to tomorrow. Yes, I'm talking about all of these things for the third road period, but that journey has already started, and we need to continue to build on what we're doing for 2025 and beyond. And then just briefly to touch on technology. That plays a huge part in the way that we design and build roads, the way that we operate them, and of course the foundation we're building to support connected and autonomous vehicles, which will lead to opportunities in terms of traffic density, being able to cope with higher traffic volumes within the same network, but also improving information flows to customers and the quality of journeys that everyone can plan on our roads. So I rattled through a lot of things there quickly, but I think that the key things I would like to sort of leave you with is that we need to continue to work and plan together. Much of what we are doing is mutually beneficial, and we can make, I think, excellent progress on the route towards both the use of greater technology and sustainability and net zero. But I'll pause at that point because I'm sure there are questions.
Thank you very much, Nick. Round of applause, Nick. Stay where you are, Nick. I've got a couple of questions, and if the house lights go up a little bit, I can see some people, if they have got questions. Andrew's got a microphone. Stick your hand up if you've got a question, and Andrew will rush over to you. Andrew, look out for a question. Nick, in terms of the STBs, there's a question of, I suppose, what's in it for you? How would better engagement with STBs really help the delivery of your priorities and programs going forward?
So I think we already have very good engagement, but it's a system. Our network is a system. That system has to integrate with local roads, with communities, and what is happening in each of the regions. And I was just thinking back to some of the conversation in the panel. We're building roads to support the economy, housing. So it's really key that we are able to work with you on where those needs are coming, so that what we do with the strategic road network supports that.
Question at the back. Have you got a microphone there? Yeah, fire away. Say who you are and fire away.
Chris Todd from Transport Action Network. You've talked about National Highways looking at its construction carbon, but National Highways never looks at the user carbon, the emissions that are generated by expanding the road network. What is National Highways going to do to address that? Because we've heard this morning that we cannot ignore carbon and climate change, and we've got to start making things better rather than making things worse. And I don't think that means just relying on other things happening like the electrification. So what is National Highways going to do to reduce user emissions itself from the road network?
I'm building on that, Nick. There's a question here. How will a journey on National Highways roads be different in 2030? So building on that.
Yeah, so I think there are a number of bits to that. So as I mentioned, we're looking at our own carbon. So how all of the journeys that we make, both to look after the road, to run our business, we will get those to net zero by 2030. The government's target of tailpipe carbon getting to zero by 2050, we are committed to supporting that. But I think a lot of that hinges on what we do about looking at our network as a system. So it's not going to happen unless the facilities are in place for all of us to be able to make those changes. So thinking about what we put in place to support electric charging. So range anxiety. If you're making long distance journeys, you need to be sure that you will be able to recharge your car, your van, your lorry in an easy to access and quick way. Turning to freight, we're looking at how we can support the electrification of freight, and also looking at all other fuels like hydrogen. If I go back to before Christmas, I went to visit JCB, where they're working on hydrogen plant, which is really exciting to see. So I think that that probably plays a part in the future as well. But yeah, we if we look out to 2050, supporting the reduction of tailpipe carbon is incredibly important. Then our focus has to be on our maintenance and construction carbon, because that will become the more important element.
Nick, in 1997, I think it was John Prescott who had this integrated transport policy where roads and rails and metros and everyone, there was an integration to that whole transport scheme. And that is all, I suppose, still on the agenda. How does Network Rail, how does National Highways, all over the place, how does National Highways see itself as part of that integrated transport policy for the future?
So we're working with Network Rail on integrated transport plans. To achieve the targets that we've talked about, there does need to be some modal shift. But I go back to the strategic road network. 2/3 of all freight journeys take place on our network. That will not massively shift. But there are parts of it where it will be incredibly beneficial for there to be some shift. And so we do need to look at how we can move between the different modes of transport more easily.
Okay, question at the back there.
Oh, hello, my name's Kevin Swift. I wonder if we can just go back to what you said slightly earlier, which what you've just said appears to contradict a little. Earlier on, you said that decarbonisation would be achieved by the change, presumably mainly electrification, a change in the technology of the actual traffic, and not, at that time you said, not by demand management. Now, just now I think a bit of a shift. You've said that modal shift does play some part. So, but you don't see it as any part of your job to seek to, for example, discourage someone like me from using the M1 to come down from Yorkshire this morning as opposed to the train. You see your role as passive?
Where is your role? How do you describe your role?
So how would describe role? So if you look at, I don't think there was a contradiction in what I was saying. So we see our role as, in terms of the carbon reduction, splitting into those three areas: the carbon we produce as an organisation, looking after and maintaining the network; 2, in the way we build and maintain the network; and then 3, in supporting the reduction in tailpipe carbon, so that's enabling shift of vehicle fleet from diesel and petrol into electric and hydrogen. But the overall reduction toward, or path towards net zero, will involve, yes, some modal shift. And I think questions do arise around demand management. So we're seeing, if we look at forecast projections, they've gone down because population growth figures have reduced. But as we move into EV, the per mile cost, once you've bought an electric vehicle, are lower. So, I mean, there is a question about what happens with vehicle excise duty, other questions maybe around road charging. And we are working with government on those questions. I mean, we can't build our way out of some of these challenges. So we see our role as working and collaborating on these solutions, but the answer doesn't lie wholly with us.
Thanks, Nick. Final point, because time is always against us. Going back to Rachel's point earlier, can you do more? You've got your strategy for decarbonising, your strategies. Can you do more?
So I'm sure there's always more that we can do. We both spend or invest a lot of money in innovation. We work with many of you in the room on innovation and how we can drive new ideas. new approaches. So, we're massively open to collaborating with everyone to accelerate the pace with which we achieve many of these really important ambitions.
Thank you very much, Nick. Sorry to rush you there, but time was always against us. But Nick Harris, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to move now on to the railways, and let me introduce Elaine Seagriff. Elaine, you are part of the Great British Railways transition team. Tell us what that's all about and how you see your role here working with STBs. Elaine.
Brilliant, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure and delight to be here. I see lots of familiar faces that we haven't met in person for some time, but also it's really timely because I want to talk to you about the major steps forward we're making in developing our long-term strategy for the railways. I was posed the question, how can railways contribute to the topic here, joined up thinking across England's subnational transport bodies? Well, one of the ways we can do that is by having a sort of joined up approach to planning of the railways going forward, which is just a tiny wee part of, an important part, but a tiny part of how we're seeing the transition and what we're seeing around the rail network more generally, and I'll say a little bit about that. So we are developing a long-term strategy for the railways with the Department for Transport, but also with agreed objectives agreed across other government departments. And that sounds simple and straightforward, but it was quite a task to get that agreed, so that's really important. And apart from having a plan, which is always handy, but there's no point in having a plan unless you have mechanisms to implement it. And a key part of the plan is to optimise and better utilise the railway network. But also we can do that by better integration across the country, across the different parts of Britain. So that sort of spatial integration is vital in terms of how we can work together going forward. And as you know, I have been meeting many of you in the development of the early stages of the strategy, which is still ongoing, and that will continue. So as part of an adjunct to today, I want to reassure and say, please keep talking to us. We want to hear from you. We have been reviewing all of your plans. We've been reviewing all your strategies, and we've been reviewing all the call for evidence responses we have received, but I'll say a little bit more about that. But just to sort of acknowledge, it's not an easy time to be doing a strategy and to do reforming railways when you're emerging out of a global pandemic, and you've seen huge changes in how people are travelling and lots of uncertainty as to how that's going to change in the future. So, and also, the revenue implications, the financial position we're in with the cost of living crisis, etc., that's going on at the moment. It's not a great time. There's not that many things that are certain in the future. But from my experience, working Transport for London and other bodies in the consultancy world, really, there's no time that you need a strategy more than a time with so many uncertainties. So it's really important to try and consolidate our thinking. So if we skip to the next slide, please.
Does it click it down underneath your...
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. So, as you may know, the William Sharp's Plan for Rail is about a year old. That came out to really, after about a 2-year review, to really set out the plan for how we need to reorganise just about every dimension of how the railway network was run, through the contracts, through the planning, through and the organisation of it. So Great British Railways Transition Team is the body that I'm involved in, which is actually setting up the new rail body, and that's going to take a bit of time. But one of the things, the specific asks of that, was to set out a 30-year strategy. And I mentioned the need to get agreed. We've got agreement across government on the objectives for the railway going forward over the 30-year period. Not surprisingly, the need to be, and this come out of the white paper, a much greater focus on meeting customer needs and understanding them much better. And then obviously in the context of revenue recovery, emerging from the pandemic, being much more sighted and understanding the whole industry, financial sustainability. So in the past, it's been quite compartmentalised, but also really strongly recognition of the really vital railway role that the railway has in supporting long-term economic growth across the country at a national perspective, but also the regional connectivity role in looking at, cities, joining up city centres, etc., and supporting the broader government levelling up agenda. And then Nick talked about the environmental sustainability, really trying to make sure we're reducing the impact of the existing network, but importantly, encouraging modal shift. Rail is extremely sustainable in terms of carbon when you've got a decent loading on those parts of the network. So again, that's important about the integration, getting people back travelling on rail where that's the best, most environmentally sustainable option. So we launched in December. We launched a call for evidence. Again, this is a massive exercise in us learning, because what we're doing is bringing voices together across the rail industry, but also across the wider sectors with an involvement in the rail network. And so we've had about 400, we've met with 400 stakeholder event groups, and we've had a really fantastic response, really from across the whole country, it's illustrated here, but from a wide range of sectors. So the key thing is it's important to understand what the wider business sectors, wider groups are interested in seeing from the rail network. So fantastic response, and we've been analysing all of those now in quite a lot of detail. We got about 307 responses, substantial responses, thousands of pages. So that's been a massive task to just draw that together and really bring all that evidence together on what people see as the important role of the railway in supporting your objectives. So again, the STBs strategies were cited, many of them cited in that, but also extra evidence where you've got case studies and all of that, which is really useful. So some of the key messages we got back from you and from others were around, we really want to see a long-term rail strategy. It's been a void, that great uncertainty of the direction of travel. It's been a bit disjointed, so bringing it together in one place is really, really vital. There was a strong support for the broad objectives, and they really, I think, resonated with a lot of the STBs and your strategies. They're very similar outcome-focused objectives. The key thing now is we're doing a lot of technical work to understand the detail behind that. But there was concern about making sure that we were really fully understanding the customer needs and customers' perspectives, not just for passengers, but also for freight, but also the whole dimension of affordability and reliability, and being really clear about how we're going to address those issues. The strategy will focus also around accessibility to make sure that that's acknowledged in the broadest sense going forward. And then the important role that we touched on just now was about the integration, making the system, supporting the system's integration and vice versa, working with partners, yourselves, to better integrate the rail network, because we all know that the important journeys are end-to-end journeys, not station to station. So having that developed in a joined-up way is vital. Financial sustainability I've touched on, really, really important, especially in the short-term pressures to fund and operate the railway, especially with less revenues coming in, but also looking at the opportunities in the future to look at new ways of funding and building on that. Supporting the longer-term economic recovery, specific to regeneration, etc., across different parts of the country, but also looking at community hubs, supporting places, and the growth of sustainable freight through attracting more freight onto rail. Levelling up connectivity, looking specifically about local connectivity, regional connectivity, not just to jobs, but also supporting housing growth and education and wider social access to social opportunities. And also the important role of regional decision-making and input through devolution, forming partnerships. And we've got a specific area that we're working on at the moment to really understand how we can get more involved and be better partners with you guys going forward. And then last but not least, looking at rail electrification, but also alternatives through, because it's not always affordable, there's a technical reason why it can't happen, but also battery and hydrogen-powered trains, but also looking at how we think about decarbonisation more generally across the whole of the rail network. So there's a lot of detail, and the report that we've prepared will be published very, very soon, and that will summarise, but it's still a substantial body of text, but that will summarise all the key messages we received from the call for evidence, and we plan to build on that and to continue that engagement with you guys and your partners going forward. So in terms of the strategy itself and the work around GBR, there's lots of things going on at the moment, a myriad of different activities, but I was saying to someone earlier, it's like probably the most complex time in which to produce, to be doing all of this work, but actually, I'm saying earlier, it's in great need, but there's a lot of moving pieces here at the moment. But so there's a small sort of dedicated team, the transition team, taking this forward, but working with colleagues across the whole industry and the supply chain, really trying to build that momentum and common understanding and views going forward. And really that's and supported with the technical work, looking at the, understanding the network, understanding the demand, how behaviours are changing going forward, understanding what the performance of the rail network is and could be going forward, what the reference case be, what it looks like with the integrated rail plan, optimising HS2. So lots of really sort of different dimensions that we are getting to grips with. And someone else mentioned earlier about data and sharing information. One thing that surprised me was we don't have joined up data for all of this, so we're having to beg, steal and borrow from different sources, but a big part of the work is bringing that together and understanding the performance and the options going forward. And of course we're looking at a range of scenarios for the future, given the days of predict and provide are long gone, well behind us. So continue to work with you. I'd be grateful. It's been really helpful having your support in developing the call for evidence, and you've been really helpful in providing us with really substantial responses, which we're taking on board moving forward. So happy to have any points of clarification, questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Elaine. I've got a couple of quick points, just to similar to start to the point I made with Nick. I mean, I talked about the name, Great British Railways, but of course it's more than that. How do you see, how does it enable you to do more? To go back to what Rachel said, how does it enable you to do more? And I suppose, how would better engagement with the STBs really help you to drive forward your priorities?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. And something I didn't touch on, probably should have done, is that we've been really thinking hard about how we change the way of working and develop a much more collaborative way of working. So hopefully the people that have been involved working with me on the development of the strategy will feel that we've had that two-way conversation. We want that to continue. I suppose in terms of the broader remit now that we have, Great British Railways transition team is about the whole railway. It's not Network Rail 2.0. It's about the whole, it's about the infrastructure, the fares, the operations in the future once the contracts change, how that's all happening, and certainly that's the remit we've been given with the department, and we're responsible to the ministers. So it's sort of having that ability to reach across the whole country, understand different views, but also have that communication with ministers. The idea is we'll have a strategy which is kept, it's an agile strategy, it will be kept under review and will be sort of responsible to ministers for that. So it's having that sort of connectivity, if you like.
There's lots of themes going through on Slido. Why don't you take a chat here in the audience? Yeah, far away, and I'll come to some stuff on Slido.
Good morning, Simon Rainish from Inner Viking Limited. 2 questions. One, is there a strategy for Great British Rail to install solar panels and wind turbines at all stations to make them self-sustainable and reduce the massive carbon footprint from the electrical use? Second question is, there are currently 55 million ticket options across the networks, and a myriad of organisations who require their bit of that revenue is there a policy going to be to slash that number and make rail considerably cheaper than travelling by car?
Okay, well, take two points here. One about the second point, which is about how are you going to make rail more affordable. And I suppose there's a question on Slido which relates to the fact that, what is the impact of doing that on modal shift? And secondly, I suppose building on that is, how are you really moving to tackle climate change?
Yeah, so I should say I am from the transition team. I'm not responsible for Network Rail, but that will become part of Great British Railways going forward. But what we are looking in terms of solar panels and the details of that right now. But what we will have as part of our planning is a decarb strategy for the whole of the rail network. That will be part of it. So yes, we'll be looking at how we decarbonise, the use and through the use of the railway estate. But I can't say specifically about station plans specifically. Ticketing options, absolutely. The culture, the purpose for GBRTT has been set out as creating a simpler, better railway for everyone in Britain. And that sounds quite easy and straightforward, but actually it's so complicated to use the railway at the moment, the myriad of different ticket types. I couldn't agree more, frankly. It has to address that, definitely. We're definitely mindful of the affordability issue, and we are looking at that whole dimension as part of the financial sustainability going forward. The change that we've seen from the movement, less commuting and more leisure trips, has to be a factor that we have to be looking at a wider range of options for a wider range of people using the network. So definitely. Okay.
There's a lot of questions on Slido about freight rail. Robert McIvan, rail freight is a real opportunity for my sector, aggregates and cement, for modal shift. How can we make it easier to connect producers and customers?
Okay, so part of the GBRTT is setting up a small sort of freight unit to basically be a one-stop shop to bring people together, and they're going to be coming out with an engagement sort of strategy to talk to you more directly and understand the specific freight targets we can go for across the network.
Question at the back there, and I'll come to the question at the front here, so far away.
David Heitch. In all the elements you mentioned on the transition plan, there was nothing about creating an organisation that will be able to look forward rather than another layer of organisational structure built on the many over the last 150 years. And I wonder where that fitted in your overall strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I only had a few minutes to talk, so there's a huge amount of work going on with the department to look at the new organisation. So there's a transition team set up to look at day one, what we can do for having our organisation set up for day one, and what's requiring legislation and what the end state is. So that is very much in train. In fact, most of the rest of the team, the leadership team that I work with, are very, very focused on that specifically. And come and have a word. I can talk to you in more detail about that. But yeah, that's very much a focus of the department and of the transition team and Andrew Haynes and others.
Questions are flooding in thick and fast. I've got one at the back. Where is it? Is it Darren? Yeah.
Darren Kaplan, Rail Industry Association. Given that April's figures on the main line were roughly 80% of pre-COVID levels, given the Office of National Statistics show that in terms of flexible working, it's actually only 1 in 9 people who are doing it, and the vast majority of people are still commuting and going in every day, isn't there a danger that if you're looking at the next 20, 30 years of rail, decisions will be based on the last 2 years rather than the long-term future of rail? And so my question and my comment is we should be looking long-term with rail and not looking at the last 2 years to base our future rail strategy, and certainly not based on the 1 in 9. And my concern is that we're talking about a new normal and everything has to change. Actually, we're making really good progress, and the bounce back's been quite positive, given that restrictions on COVID only went, the end of February.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are looking at a number of scenarios so that we can sort of test our assumptions really around, what is the new normal and population demographic change, etc., all of that good stuff, and really not pinning our strategy on one of them. What we need to do is be flexible enough to respond to challenges as we move forward. So absolutely, I agree with that, definitely.
Okay. Question at the front here, yeah.
Owen O'Neill. While we've got a degree of uncertainty over passenger demand, some markets, particularly intermodal, are above pre-COVID levels. So how do we ensure that where there are known capacity constraints limiting the demand on that market, how do we ensure that the implementation period of GBR does not become an excuse to pause vital schemes to unlock intermodal?
So there's a number of interventions that are already agreed with government, and the assumption is we need to just understand the wider dimensions of those and what they produce and how they fit with the wider scenarios. So it's not to halt them. What we need to do is optimise what we've got, as Nick was saying earlier about in terms of national highways, optimise what we've got and get better integration. But also understand how joined up all of the various proposals are. So avoiding a shopping list of infrastructure and looking at wider outcomes and joined up planning more generally across the country. It's terribly disjointed at the moment, so there's a lot of work to do there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to have to wrap up right now, but there's a final question, which is where I was going to finish. Suzanne Winkles says, how are Great British Railways going to ensure they integrate with other modes? How do you place yourself in the heart of that integrated transport? Absolutely. It's a two-way conversation, isn't it? But my door is open literally to that. I think it's vital. We will not succeed if we don't do that. So. We know where you live, Elaine. We know where you live. Thank you very much, Elaine Seagriff. Round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.